Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Wes Warren. I'm here with Greg Stanley. We're from Whitehall Management, and we're going to talk about the three surprising ways to fail with an associate. There are many. We picked three today, and we're going to cover more in the future, but today we only have time to cover three. There's many ways to fail with an associate, believe me. And unfortunately, you've got to cover them all off to be successful. This is not uh, a scenario where you just get one thing right and you're all good. No, there's many ways to sink this ship. So we're going to talk about three ways. The first one, Greg, I would like you to comment on is overpaying, out of the chute. What happens? Why do doctors overpay? What leads them to overpay in the first place? And how do you fix that? How do you solve that?
Okay, that's a good question. I think that a lot of doctors don't know the fundamental of what makes this work. For example, the thing that makes it work is providing an associate with opportunity. And a lot of owners struggle with their own opportunity, trying to keep their own chairs full. So when an associate asks for 35 or 40% or more, they're thinking, well, okay, here's a handful of business cards, go out and get patients. I don't care what percentage the associate's talking about, you need to get on the same page. They want opportunity. And we know, and we're sharing it with you now, we know there's a percentage you can give and afford to provide opportunity.
Yeah, it's going to run around, well, not around, it's got to be below 30% and below. And the ideal, if you've got a practice going real well, a lot of patient flow, a lot of opportunity, you can be at 25%. So ideal is 25% of adjusted production.
On the associate that pushes back and says, I want 30 or 33 or whatever, I want you to remember, if you can make this work with the associate, you'll quickly have another associate and they'll want the same percentage. So what Wes is saying is true. You got to keep it at 30 or below. And if they push, you can always add back in labs, costs, continuing education. In other words, there's different things you can shove back and forth across the table.
But it's still got to end up at 30%, right?
Exactly.
There you go. Anything above that, and why do it? Practices only net historically across the country, 38%. And this whole idea that I've already got my fixed costs, so it just hasn't played out that way. These costs of adding an associate, the cost of doing business, staff costs, everything rises. The overhead rises with the addition of the associate, and their lack of inefficiency easily offsets the things that you're saying, oh, my fixed costs are already here. Their inefficiency washes that away. Let's put it that way. That's why it's got to be 30% or below. And so we definitely recommend that you actually, if there's arguments or you're having trouble bringing somebody on board, you're better off paying a larger guarantee than going up on the percentage. That's where we stand on that. Now every area is different as far as the guarantee, but the percentage is the percentage. I don't care if you're on the East Coast or the West Coast. In LA, it doesn't matter. That's the percentage.
Let's talk a little about guarantee for a second, because that's largely how we attract people. They don't know us, they don't trust us, and it's the guarantee that makes them sign on the bottom line. How do we get a guarantee and not end up upside down paying a doctor, to paying them a lot to be inefficient?
So we're big on a guarantee, a good one that attracts good people, and they should be eclipsing it within 90 days. So within 90 days, they should be zoomed past that guarantee and actually outproducing it, or one of two things. The office wasn't ready to support them in various different ways. So management support, capacity support, but also case acceptance support, all that kind of stuff. So the office failed, or they're failing. It's one or the other.
And you're saying that if we haven't worked that out in 3 to 4 months, we're probably going to be seeing them leave the office anyway.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid with the guarantee.
Yeah, right.
Look at their numbers and say, what they're producing and what I would pay them as a percentage, has not come near the guarantee, so I'm gonna get somebody else.
That's right. You either get somebody else or you assess what's going on inside the practice, because it's one or the other. I can't give you I can't tell you if it's 50-50. 50% it's of the time it's them, 50% of the time it's the office. Obviously, our offices, we try to gear up and get everything ready, so it's never the office's fault. We know we're ready, we have enough patients, the systems are there. But I would say most offices, yeah, patient flow is one thing, but also systems inside the practice. So
And it's so easy to underestimate the additional training an associate will need right out of school. I really feel like we finish their education chair side. There's so many things they can say they've done once, so they can say they've done it, but they've never seen what happens when it goes bad. In other words, they need additional training for that 90 days, or you're probably going to ensure their failure.
yeah, so you get into the clinical side of it too, where they're slow. Somebody's right out of school, you're dealing with another issues, being too slow, which will give an extra month if that's the case. If it's somebody that's been out of school, you could still have all these same problems.
Yeah, they're walking down the hall with a party hat and a noisemaker celebrating a 4-hour crown.
right. Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't fail and have to be redone, but let's face it, it failed if it takes 4 hours when it should take an hour and a half or less.
Yeah. Unsupervised was the next thing, Greg, on our list. This is where we turn them loose. They're a doctor, we may even know where they worked before and feel very comfortable with their skills, liked where they interned at, and the school they went to, and just assume they're probably pretty good.
What I see, Wes, in training and management oversight, there's always this big thing about believing in people to make them better. Well, there's things they simply don't know. I don't care how much you believe in them. They don't know. So when they start out, we saw an office turn an endodontic procedure over to a new associate who claimed to have done endo in a clinic, like, a government finance or whatever.
Yeah.
Disaster. He took a long time. It went badly. He had to go get the owner. It was a big embarrassment. So just count on worst case as you bring them on.
So as far as how we deal with that, one thing that I would make sure happens for the first 90 to 120 days, because skill problems reveal themselves very quickly. This is not something that was good and then all of a sudden it's not good. No, it usually almost always reveals itself within that first 90 days. So we're big on letting go of your favorite, most trusted assistant and let them be their chair side for that time period, and have meetings with that assistant and find out, what does it look like? How's the dentistry look to you compared to what you're used to seeing the dentistry that I'm doing?
I think we're too often waiting for a patient to approach the front desk with a serious complaint about the associate. Let's don't wait for that. Let's get that, like you said, let's get a set of eyes and ears that are as good as your own watching this process.
The other thing is kind of bedside manner. We run into that too. So I'll say about a third of the time we have quality issues where it's just not up to the standard of the practice and it's just not going to work. You got to let them go. And then I would say a good 20% of the time we have to work on their bedside manner, where they are a little abrupt, almost rude to patients, could be even to staff, that we have to iron out. Now, those things those aren't deal killers. Usually those things can be ironed out, but you don't want to let them sit and fester where you don't even know what's happening because you're not getting the proper feedback. You've got to have good eyes and ears, people you trust, and good lines of communication with them at least for 90 days. And
when Wes and I get to talk to an associate before he or she is hired, we ask them how they feel about working for staff as opposed to just working with them. This idea that, we do things a certain way in this practice and we want you to do it also. How do you feel about the staff guiding you into that culture? And when they say yes, we step right in, or the staff steps right in and guides them into the culture. Here's how we talk to people. Here's what we don't say.
Yeah, they got to give the scouts honor, hey, I'll take constructive criticism from your team. They got to come in knowing, just like you said, Greg, that they came in that way with that understanding that the team is going to be your eyes and ears and help you assimilate.
This is an area that gets into who they are, not what they've been trained at. So if they're kind of, a mental nerd type, and they don't relate with people well, let's get like you said, the lines clear on who relates with the patient, who warms them up, and the doctor plays his or her part appropriately. Okay, next, Wes, another problem we see is really, not only does it mess things up, but it draws way long the period it takes to evaluate an associate. Namely, what we're expecting of them. And if I could use the word quota, I will. If you like key performance indicator or whatever, but where do we set our production quotas based on a 4-day week?
Yeah, so we'll do it by day just to make it easy. So we're looking for $1,000 a day the first month, $2,000 a day the second month, $3,000 a day the third month. And that's kind of where we need them to be. So if it drags on to the fourth month that they're hitting 3,000, okay, if they're close. But we got to get them to that mark within that time period. That's as far as how we ramp them up. But then there needs to be quotas on patient flow. And this is another big mistake offices make, is there's no set boundaries on how many patients they see, how many the owner sees. It's just kind of, and if you leave it to that, what happens is the staff will just fill them in because you're usually busy and always running somewhat late, and they hate that because they get the evil eye from patients. And so they'll just load up the associate with all the new patients, with all the hygiene checks, and it turns into an utter disaster for the practice as they underperform and wallow. And you'll do good because your schedule's booked out 2 or 3 weeks, but then they'll start drawing off. And about 2 months into it, you'll be like, what happened to my schedule? And it's a disaster, a financial disaster for you. And when I say financial, this is where you're writing checks. This is where you're in the negative. This is one way to go negative real quick with an associate where you're writing checks, is where that's not clearly defined.
Yeah. Every month that the associate is underperforming, underwhelming, it's cost you. Everybody agrees on that. Wes said 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. That's in a practice where the associate is well supported, great staff, training, all of that. If you're not providing that, it drags on, and here's what happens. You say, no, he's not doing good. Maybe I should get rid of him, but maybe it's my fault. In other words, this is something you got to nail down. We have a great system. It supports the owner. It supports the associate.
Whose problem is it? Right, exactly, Greg. We got to figure out, are we failing him or is he failing us or she? And the thing about the 3,000 a day, getting them to that mark, anything below that, and you'll struggle with retention of your associates in general. So if they're underneath that mark, we'll see massive associate turnover in practices and with associates. They'll just go one practice to the next, to the next, to the next, and produce 30 or 40,000 a month and kind of be at that 2,000 a day or something like that. And, getting a third of it's not doctor money, it's not, they didn't sign up to make 80 grand, not 100 grand a year, to be a doctor. And so they will never be happy until you get them at that mark. And so that's why it's very important that you have the practice geared up to deliver that for them, and that you get them there as quick as possible.
You already, we talk about bonus, but you already have your associate on a bonus eventually, or quickly he's getting a percentage. So they tend to be motivated, but they've got to be trained and they got to be supervised. The important thing we found is to not let it drag on.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to make a call, a go, no go, very quickly.
3 to 4 months, just like we
Yeah,
said.
and if you've got a good assistant in there, you got good support, you've provided them with adequate new patients of some quality, and we're not seeing the production numbers you talked about, it's probably time to cut it off.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are 3 ways. There are more ways, to mess it up.
There's a ton actually, and we're going to try to cover these, at least once a month. We'll
Yeah.
come on and cover more, but these are 3 ways. And if you're concerned about this, if you're thinking about adding an associate, or maybe you have an associate, we'll be gladly to talk with you and point you in the right direction, answer some questions, or concerned about your associate, how he's doing or she's doing. If you need help, give us a call. We'll definitely help you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.